Welcome to everyone around the world. I only have about 15 or 20 minutes at the absolute most for this video, so I'll try and make it as quick as I can. If I run out of time, I'll remake it later today. But I've had videos up before on my channel that I've taken down that talk about this contentious issue about the Tanakh being manipulated and altered by lying scribes. There's actually a lot of verses in the Bible that actually support this theory, so it's not completely unfounded. But anyways, I got some more evidence from scholars and different sources as well, Jewish sources. Anyways, long story short, I think there's sufficient evidence to show that whoever it was, that lying scribes manipulated the Bible, okay, the Old Testament, the Tanakh, Torah and Tanakh and all that. Because of my limited time, I think the one issue I'll really focus on here is the issue of sacrifices. Now, I'm not going to bring the whole Christian element into this, but I'll just mention Christianity teaches that the animal sacrifices did not atone for sin. It's what it teaches in the New Testament. Okay, and we understand that with Jesus, Messiah, and a lot of Jews believe that with Messiah there will be no sacrifices anyways. Okay, so that's just my position. So I'm trying to understand why the books of Ezra and Nehemiah and Ezekiel talk about sacrifices, and they appear to be not just edifying sacrifices, but that they will be done in the world to come or something to that extent. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be talking about here. And like I said, there's a number of Bible verses that actually give some good evidence for this. Now, a lot of people don't know, to start with, that the book of Ezra and Nehemiah was split later into two different books, but the Jews are aware of this. So the fact that Ezra and Nehemiah and Ezekiel are the only three books of the, essentially speaking, the only three books of the later of the Tanakh, the latter half of the Tanakh, which actually some of them were written before the earlier books. But anyways, right, the books of the prophets and other stuff, right, they're the only three books that talk about or edify the sacrifices, right? But Ezra and Nehemiah was originally one book. So if I'm trying to prove that a lying scribe or scribes at whatever point in history manipulated stuff and inserted these false things in there, this works in my favor because it requires less conspirators and less books being worked on, you know what I mean? So anyways, I'm postulating that a lying scribe, I'm not going to try and pin down who it was, it doesn't really matter. I'm not really trying to blame Ezra or anything like that there, so don't get the wrong impression. But that a lying scribe manipulated the book Ezra, Nehemiah, and the book of Ezekiel. The books themselves might be all good, but he inserted, whoever it was, inserted these verses edifying the sacrifices. Because in that person's mind, they thought that there should be sacrifices. Okay? In Jeremiah 8, verse 8, I just want to read this verse. We see, "How do ye say we are wise, and the law of Hashem is with us? Surely, though falsely it has wrought, the false pen of scribes." Okay? And the law of Hashem, that's the Torah of Hashem. That's what is written. How do you say we are wise and the Torah of Hashem is with us? Surely, lo, falsely it has wrought, the false pen of scribes. This is directly telling you that there have been lying scribes in the Torah, okay, in the law, including everything. All right, so that's one indicator there. You also have earlier in Jeremiah 7:22, I think it is, where God explicitly says that I never commanded you to do sacrifices, and people try to twist that in vain, but that is what it says. Okay, so nonetheless, I mean, there's tons of evidence. There are so many verses. I read through like a ton of verses on a video I made, a short video a while ago. I read through all the verses where God rebukes the sacrifices, and it expresses how he doesn't like them, he hates them, he never asks them, he doesn't want them, he prefers spiritual things instead. So the evidence speaks for itself. If God is so against these things, and they're against common sense and fairness anyways, then why are they in the Bible? They could only be there because of lying scribes. So the myth of an infallible Bible had to be perpetuated. Okay? The fact is, the Bible is not infallible. The Jews openly admit that certain words have been altered, such as the name of God, for example. Okay, so anyways, it is not infallible, and I'm here to prove this. So that's Jeremiah 8. Ezekiel, shockingly, 20 verse 25 says, "And I have given to them statutes not good, and judgments by which they do not live." And in Jeremiah 7, verse 8, lo, ye are trusting for yourselves on the words of falsehood, so as not to profit. Now, a lot of Jews all know this, but Christians aren't aware that Ezra was the high priest of the time, who's in charge of all these type of things. And Ezra found a copy of the Torah in a building somewhere, and he presented it to the people. And the Jews and history and fact accords, and he testifies that Ezra actually wrote the greater copy of, the final copy of the Tanakh that is used in Judaism. Okay, these are two facts most Christians don't know, but every Jew knows. Okay, and in Nehemiah 8, I did have Nehemiah 8 open. One sec. Yeah, Nehemiah 8. There's a verse in here somewhere that I wanted to read. Of course, I didn't have this one pinpointed. Either way, I mean, I can't remember why I had this one up here, but it doesn't really matter. Either way, in Nehemiah 8, there's something interesting, I believe. I just can't remember where it is. We also know that when Ezra found this mysterious Torah scroll, and when he wrote the final version of the Tanakh, or whatever you want to call it, that he also introduced a very racist and prejudiced policy. There's no other way to spin it, where he expelled any Gentile spouses from the land. Okay, so this just goes along with the theory that I was building, that the lying scribe, whoever it might have been, Ezra or not, who cares, right? But whoever it was, that this person put these bigoted ideas into the Tanakh, that Israel and that the Jews are superior to the inferior Gentiles. You know what I mean? And even today, half of the Jews say, oh no, the Tanakh doesn't even teach that. It doesn't say we're chosen or special like that or superior. So, I mean, it depends who you ask, right? But the fact is, somebody went in there and put in these verses to make it look like there was this racial bigotry, there was this national bigotry, okay, and that there needed to be sacrifices, like mundane, physical, carnal sacrifices, and a bunch of other things, and racial and tribal genocide, essentially. These things are not from God. They don't represent God. And why are they in the Bible? Because of lying scribes. And that's why God rebukes it all throughout the Tanakh. So if we go into Ezra 6, I had all these verses opened up, positioned right where I need to read from ahead of time. And these last two here, it's just like the computer scrolled down by itself and I can't find which verse I had highlighted here. So I'm not going to waste any time if I can't see it in the next few seconds. Okay, it was verse 2. It says, there has been found at Acmetha in a palace that is in the province of Media a roll. I don't know if this is the roll that Ezra found or what, but I just figured I'd mention it just to cover all my tracks. So anyways, that's enough of the Bible verses for now. Let's go look at some really interesting facts. Okay? Why does Ezekiel talk about this future temple with animal sacrifices? Why does he edify sacrifices and present all of that? Like, why does that seem so contrary to what a lot of Jews believe and to the entirety of Christianity, right? Why would this be? Well, number one, a lot of people argue he could just be talking about the second temple that was going to be rebuilt. Okay? But nonetheless, I think we don't need to worry about that argument, just focus on the fact of a lying scribe for now, right? So what I want to do is scroll down to the life and times of Ezekiel. Let me read this thing here, this whatever it is. It says the book of Ezekiel describes itself as the words of Ezekiel ben Buzi, a priest living in exile in the city of Babylon between 593 and 571 BC. Most scholars today accept the basic authenticity of the book, but see in it significant additions by a school of later followers of the original prophet. According to Jewish tradition, the men of the Great Assembly wrote the book of Ezekiel based on the prophet's words. While the book exhibits considerable unity and probably reflects much of the historic Ezekiel, it is a product of a long and complex history and does not necessarily preserve the very words of the prophet. So that's quite interesting. Okay, and because I don't have Oh, well, here we go. Is this worth reading? Well, a little touch in the critical history. Um, there's a few people arguing against the authorship and authenticity of it, but I'm just going to read one of them. It says the most influential modern scholarly work on Ezekiel, Walter Zimmerli's two-volume commentary, appeared in German in 1969 and in English 1979 and 1983. Zimmerli traces the process by which Ezekiel's oracles were delivered orally and transformed into a written text by the prophet and his followers through a process of ongoing rewriting and reinterpretation. He isolates the oracles and speeches behind the present text and traces Ezekiel's interaction with a mass of mythological, legendary, and literary material as he develops his insights into Hashem's purposes during the period of destruction and exile. So anyways, we can clearly see that even the professionals, the scholars, okay, have agreed that the book wasn't written by Ezekiel and it wasn't written all at one time. It was written by a bunch of different people over a period of time. Okay, so this directly supports my theory that I'm proposing, that lying scribes put things into Ezra, Nehemiah, and Ezekiel in order to edify these carnal things, which is actually against God. Okay, so also Ezekiel lived during around 590 BC, roughly. Some scholars say that the book wasn't actually completed or actually written until around 300 BC. And there's some discrepancy, but we've just seen the other scholars agree that it was written over a period of time by a bunch of people. Okay, so again, the Bible is not infallible, right? I don't think I'll bother, in order to save time, I won't bother reading some of the stuff about Ezra Nehemiah, the book of it. What I'm going to do is jump straight into these things here. This here is from a Jewish site called Jewish Bible Quarterly. Okay, and it's a page called Reconciling the Sacrifices of Ezekiel with the Torah. Because a lot of Jews would say, oh, Ezekiel talked about the sacrifices and it's got to be the third temple. So, I mean, even if you want to think it's the second temple, the Jews would say that, oh, he's edifying sacrifices. So you can't say that sacrifices are done away with or that God doesn't like them. However, this Jewish website has pointed out the following, which I personally may not have noticed all of these details, that the sacrifices Ezekiel talks about aren't biblical. That's a major support for my theory that this was put in by a lying scribe. Okay? It says here, the last chapters of the book of Ezekiel envision and describe the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the Holy Temple. On closely examining the sacrifices that Ezekiel prescribes for festivals and appointed times, from chapter 45 and 46, we note that his descriptions do not accord with the sacrifices that the Torah lays down for those occasions. In this article, I thought God never changed. I thought his word never changed, like the Jews and the rabbis say. I thought you can't add to or take away from his word, like the rabbis say. So clearly, this is false scribal work. Clearly, you can't argue, okay? Unless you just want to admit that you're a hypocrite. So, in this article, we will point out various discrepancies between the two accounts and explore the approaches taken by Jewish scholars throughout the ages in reconciling them. In other words, trying to justify something that you can't really excuse. It says, regarding the animals to be sacrificed, Ezekiel prescribes a bull as a sin offering to be brought on the 1st, 7th, and 14th of Nisan, in addition to the regular sacrifice made on the 14th. For the 7 days of Passover, he mandates 7 bulls and 7 rams as burnt offerings, and 1 goat as a sin offering. Ezekiel also states that the sacrifices of the 7 days of Tabernacles match the sacrifices on the 7 days of Passover. He further prescribes burnt offerings of 6 lambs and 1 ram every Sabbath, a bull, 6 lambs, and a ram every Rosh Hodesh, and a lamb every morning. Regarding the meal offerings, Ezekiel notes several times that an ephah of flour is offered together with each bull and ram, and as much as 1 wishes or can afford with each lamb. He also prescribes a measure of 1 hin of oil to be brought with every ephah of flour. For the daily sacrifices, Ezekiel assigns a different meal-to-animal ratio. For the burnt offering of 1 lamb, a sixth of the ephah of flour is required together with a third of a hin of oil. These are the contradictions between what he says and the Torah. It says there are many discrepancies between the sacrifices described by Ezekiel and those laid down in the Torah. The sin offering of a bull to be made on the 1st, 7th, and 14th of Nisan is not recorded anywhere in the Torah. Second, while Ezekiel prescribes 7 bulls, 7 rams as a burnt offering on each day of the Passover, the Torah ordains only 2 bulls and 1 ram, but 7 lambs also for the sacrifice. This is Numbers 28. Furthermore, while Ezekiel equates the sacrifices of the Passover festival with those of tabernacles, they are not identical in the Torah. The Torah, in fact, prescribes a varying number of bulls for each day of tabernacles. 13th on the first day, decreasing to 7 on the 7th, plus 2 rams and 14 lambs as burnt offerings. This is from Numbers 29. The burnt offerings that Ezekiel prescribes for the Sabbath, 6 lambs and 1 ram, differ from those mentioned in the Torah from Numbers 28, which consist of 2 lambs, only as burnt offerings and nothing more. Similarly, the burnt offerings which Ezekiel prescribes for Rosh Hodesh, a bull, 6 lambs, 1 ram, are also at odds with the Torah from Numbers 28, which calls for 2 bulls, 7 lambs, and 1 ram. 7 lambs and 1 ram as a burnt offering. Point 4. In regard to the daily temple sacrifices, Ezekiel requires that 1 lamb be brought each morning as a burnt offering, whereas the Torah ordains the sacrifice of 2 lambs every day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening. Exodus 29, Numbers 28. Ezekiel only refers to the morning sacrifice and not to the one in the evening. Ezekiel, point 5, makes no mention of the special sacrifices that the Torah ordains for the second day of Passover from Leviticus 23, the Shavuot, Pentecost Festival, Leviticus 23, Numbers 28, Rosh Hashanah, Numbers 29, Yom Kippur, Leviticus 16, Numbers 29, and Shemini Atzeret from Numbers 29. Point 6. The meal to animal ratios in Ezekiel do not correspond to those in the Torah. On all special days, Ezekiel requires that. I'm not even going to get into all that, but it does. It's a big paragraph. Point 7, the final one. The quantity of libation accompanying each meal offering in Ezekiel also differs from that laid down in the Torah. Okay, I don't need to read that whole paragraph out there. So clearly, even the Jews, even the pros, the scholars, show that it ain't Torah. Okay? It's not Torah. It's not from God. So it was put in there by lying scribes. All right? Now, the Talmud in Moed Katan 18b teaches that Ezra, who is known as Ezra HaSofer, Ezra the scribe, wrote a Sefer Torah, which was used as the definitive text for all new Sefer Torah through the Second Temple era. So that's an interesting point. Now here's on another Jewish site called Torah Philosophy, and this article is called "Could Ezra Have Written the Torah?" Let me just check my time here. Could Ezra have written the Torah? I'm going to spend a few more minutes and that's it. Okay, it says a document written by a priest in the kingdom of Judah about the 800 BC. Sorry, this would require me reading a huge amount of material here. One second, let's see if they have a conclusion. Okay, what it's doing is it's breaking down the sections of the Torah, because they're all written in different periods of time by different people. Okay, so it broke down all these different periods of time, and it says, finally, Ezra came about 450 BC at the time of the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, and presented to the people the Torah scroll which we have today, compiled from all the above sources. He claimed that this was the true original scroll, originally written by Moses, and all Jews accepted that as fact until modern times. Having behind him the power of the Persian government, he was able to eliminate any opposition. So the article says, the question is this scenario plausible? First of all, at the time of the Second Temple was built, Jews were scattered throughout the Persian Empire. If they had no single Torah scroll, but rather various different traditions and texts passed down over the previous 1,000 years, it is hard to imagine Ezra succeeding in presenting a single, never-before-seen scroll. Yeah, it wasn't entirely new, it just had slight modifications. In recent times, this might be comparable to the story of Joseph Smith. But again, Joseph Smith still edified the Bible. He just wrote extra books. He added things and interpretation into it. That's all I'm going to read from there because my time is diminishing. This article is called Ezra Changed the Torah Text, Tikkunei Soferim, which can be translated as corrections by the scribes, refers to at least 18 changes that were made in the original wording of the Hebrew Bible during the Second Temple period, perhaps sometime between 450 and 350 BC, during the time which I think the texts were manipulated by whoever the false scribe was. Most of these changes were made to enhance the honor due to God, to avoid a problem, or to use less harsh words. Some sources suppose the changes were made by Ezra the scribe and or men of the Great Assembly. We do not know exactly when Ezra lived, but he probably lived around 450 BC, which is when Artaxerxes commissioned the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the temple, which fulfills Daniel's prophecy and pinpoints Jesus as Messiah 483 years later. So that's all time I have to read from that there, but that's just some more proof that there are these well-known alterations. And finally, this is from a Jewish blog. I won't mention the name to reserve some privacy. And his article here is, where are 3 different Torah scrolls found in the temple? I don't know what this says. It might work in favor of my theory or against it. This is the final thing I'll read, and then I'll have to end my video. It says, as we see, based on 2 Talmudic, 1 Midrashic, and 1 Aggadic account, there appears to have been a weak point in the integrity of a perfectly unblemished line of transmission from Ezra's Sefer Torah to ours. Wow, admission. In this article, we will attempt to show how, fascinatingly, in a 100-year-old scholarly paper, Jacob Lauterbach reinterprets aspects of these rabbinic accounts, thereby strengthening what otherwise may have been a weak link in the rabbinic narrative of that transmission. I don't have time to read it, but maybe I'll make a part 2 and expand on this a little bit more. That's all I have time for today. I've got to get going. God bless you all.